the grand Siderean chamber of confluence, was not merely an architectural structure. It was a physical manifestation of the hegemony's protracted, almost geologic patience and authority, a vast dome of shimmering, petrified stellar dust where silence was not an absence of sound, but a heavy, deliberate presence, magnifying every soft chime of the atmospheric regulators and every calculated exhalation of the high-ranking delegates whose forms were barely visible in the semi-darkness, seated upon the tiered, obsidian rings that spiraled down toward the central discussion plenum, which currently held the flickering, holographic schematics of the Sol system. Hegemon Tiklar, whose carapace was a mottled mosaic of age and rank, leaned forward imperceptibly, the movement disturbing the ambient shadows just enough to signal the profound weight of the coming pronouncement. His 4 primary visual receptors focused with cold, analytical intensity upon the anomalous, green-tinged planet that the primitive charts called Earth. A world that was causing more intellectual friction within the millennia-old stability of the hegemony than the collapse of a minor stellar nursery had 3 centuries prior. We have permitted the Sol species to sustain their internal dissonance for too long. Hegemon Tiklar's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic null field, a deep, chitinous thrum that vibrated the very air, carrying the unimpeachable authority of countless successfully managed crises and strategic withdrawals. Yet even he could not fully mask the subtle tremor of intellectual unease that clung to the topic of humanity. The reports from the observation fleet remain consistent. Political fragmentation, catastrophic resource allocation conflicts, self-inflicted ecological wounds, and a clear, almost deliberate atrophy of martial capability. Their naval tonnage is archaic. Their projected defense systems rely on principles abandoned by the core systems epochs ago, and their primary expenditure of technological resources is channeled into what their own documentation calls non-essential cultural preservation and theoretical cosmological extrapolation. The strategic analysis is unanimous. They have forgotten the fundamental, brutal necessity of conflict, the inherent truth of galactic competition. A sudden, sharp beam of light cut the gloom as Commander Arhan, head of the hegemony's defense armada, shifted in his seat on the uppermost tier, his metallic plating clicking against the obsidian, a jarring, aggressive sound in the chamber's serene stillness, his perspective one of pure logistical calculation that saw only weakness where the hegemon perceived a peculiar anomaly. With respect, hegemon, the philosophical extrapolation is secondary to the martial reality. This is not a puzzle, it is an inefficiency. Their trajectory has stalled, their societal focus is inverted. They possess the potential to scale the technological heights but dedicate that potential to internal squabbles and the creation of systems designed for ethical limitation rather than maximal lethality. We have monitored their internal debates, entire planetary defense doctrines dedicated not to victory, but to minimizing collateral damage, an absurdity. They are a vacuum of competence at the border, a strategic liability that could draw greater, more rapacious species into our sphere of influence. Their proximity to the Veridian trade spool alone necessitates immediate, definitive action to integrate their territory into the hegemony's protective architecture. Ambassador V. Riss, the hegemony's primary negotiator and expert on emergent, less developed cultures, raised one delicate, multi-jointed limb in a gesture of cautious dissent, her voice a soft, modulated counterpoint to the commander's blunt pronouncements. The commander relies too heavily upon the quantifiable metrics of fleet strength and weapon yield, ignoring the sociological and psychological data, which is, in the case of the Sol species, profoundly contradictory. They exhibit a unique duality, a demonstrable historical capacity for unimaginable self-destruction, yet an equally robust, almost instantaneous propensity for systemic, global-scale cooperation when facing an external existential threat, which they term a common enemy. Their internal history is a continuous cycle of near annihilation, followed by almost miraculous, exponential recovery and innovation. We perceive a species that has not forgotten conflict, but one that has, perhaps, made a collective, highly dangerous decision to redefine it. Their apparent weakness may be a mask of deliberate, deep-seated choice. To preemptively pacify, a culture that historically thrives upon challenge is to risk not an easy integration, but the sudden, brutal awakening of a quiescent leviathan, a creature whose internal checks have been violently removed by the very act of our intervention. The chamber held its breath, the holograph, hic representation of Sol's system flickering with the implied tension, the star a silent witness to the ideological chasm opening between the hegemony's military arm and its diplomatic core. Tiklar remained still, weighing the arguments, his long, arduous reign having taught him that the greatest strategic errors are born not of insufficient power, but of the arrogant assumption of complete knowledge. The observation reports detailing the humans' ethical frameworks, their Geneva Conventions, their war crimes tribunals, their entire complex of legal and cultural mechanisms designed to limit the efficacy of their own fighting forces, were what truly confounded the Siderian analysts. The Siderian way was simple. War was a tool, optimized for immediate, overwhelming efficiency. The humans had built complicated ethical brakes upon their own destructive capacity, a concept so alien it bordered on the psychotic. They had built the capacity for annihilation, but then systematically handicapped its use, pouring resources into systems that detected and neutralized threats without destroying them, developing energy fields that disoriented vessels rather than tearing them apart. To the Siderians, who valued pure force, this was the ultimate proof of their intellectual and martial decline. They had forgotten the ancient, necessary cruelty of power. Their constant internal bickering suggests an intrinsic instability that transcends mere political difference. It speaks to an unpredictable, chaotic nature, Lar finally declared, the movement of his head an indication that the debate was closed, the moment for decision at hand. Their own cultural output, their simulations, their stories are saturated with the fear of a technologically superior external entity, yet their defensive posture is almost negligible. They present a paradox, hyper-awareness of threat combined with fundamental strategic apathy. The commander's analysis is grim but logistically sound. We cannot afford the instability. A full-scale, direct engagement is politically unviable and risks the very escalation Virus rightly fears. However, a limited, overwhelming demonstration is necessary to force their compliance and integration. Commander Arhan, you will authorize a fleet of pacification. Their objective is not total war, but the absolute non-negotiable neutralization of their primary orbital defense network in the Sol system's outer sphere, specifically the designated Acheron line. We will demonstrate superior non-negotiable force. We will show them that the cost of resistance is immediate strategic irrelevance. Let the operation be swift, surgical, and utterly definitive. They must understand that the war they thought they had forgot to fight is now upon them, and that their self-imposed ethical limitations have rendered them unfit to survive it. The hegemon's final words hung heavy in the air, a final, cold echo of a mistake based on the profound, confident misunderstanding of a species whose greatest strength was not its weaponry, but its terrifying ability to limit its own power, a discipline the Siderians entirely failed to recognize as the pinnacle of evolution. The transition from the chamber's controlled vacuum of deliberation to the raw, kinetic energy of the launch corridors was immediate and stark. Commander Arhan, his form now encased in heavy command armor, stood upon the observation deck of the Indomitable Will, a vessel that was itself a testament to Siderian militaristic philosophy, massive, heavily armored, and designed for linear, overwhelming destruction. The fleet of pacification, a formidable, layered shield of warships built to project dominance across entire sectors, began its hyperspace transition sequence. The reality of their mission starkly contrasted against the almost pathetic reports of the human defense array they were moving to dismantle. Arhan felt a sense of cold, professional satisfaction. The humans, in their infinite, disorganized complexity, had simply failed the test of interstellar evolution, prioritizing the ephemeral over the necessary. They had forgotten that in the deep void, only strength was respected, and only the capacity for complete annihilation ensured survival. The brief period of transitional warp was used for the final, intensive intelligence briefing. The projection displayed before Arhan was the Acheron line, a collection of orbital platforms and defense satellites that had been in continuous service for centuries, systems that were, by Siderian standards, laughably underpowered and defensively porous. The central element was a single, large station, designated Sentinel-4, a relic of humanity's early interplanetary expansion, its structure seemingly patched and modified with layers of non-standard, disparate technologies. Siderian analysts had deemed the array a patchwork of desperation, a symbol of their failure to maintain a cohesive, cutting-edge military infras. Structure, Arhan gave the final, cold order. The objective remains the same, immediate non-lethal disabling of the entire Acheron network. We are establishing dominion, not initiating genocide. But should any human platform initiate an attack sequence that poses a threat to the indomitable will, all limitations are withdrawn. Let the speed of our response be a lesson in strategic commitment. The finality of the order settled upon the bridge crew, a heavy blanket of impending surgical violence. The fleet snapped out of FTL at the calculated insertion point, a precisely chosen vector that placed them instantly within optimal range of the Acheron line. The sheer scale of the Siderian fleet, its heavy, dark hulls obscuring the local star's light, was designed to be the first, most powerful statement of intent. The human vessels, small, darting, and aesthetically disorganized, were already in defensive formation, radiating the expected high-frequency warnings and challenge codes. The Siderian comms array registered the human broadcast, a signal that was immediately translated and routed to the bridge's main receiver. The voice that filled the indomitable will's bridge was entirely unexpected. It was not shrill with panic, not laced with aggressive defiance, and not distorted by fear. Instead, it was unnervingly clear, calm, and utterly professional, carrying a modulated, deep resonance that seemed to cut through the military cacophony of the bridge like a precisely tuned, ethical blade. This is Emissary Kalen of the Sol System Autonomous Defense Mandate, broadcasting from Station Sentinel-4, the voice stated, the language perfect, devoid of accent or hesitation. To the vessels of the Siderian hegemony identified as the Fleet of Pacification, your immediate tactical signature indicates an incursion designed for rapid strategic neutralization. We register the non-lethal initial targeting algorithms, which suggests a desire for political submission rather than total annihilation, an assessment we find both pragmatic and ethically noted. However, your incursion constitutes an act of war against a sovereign, non-aggressive species, and as such, we are compelled to enact the protocols for existential integrity. We advise an immediate, unconditional cessation of aggressive maneuvering and a full withdrawal to the designated observation perimeter. Failure to comply within a standard 20-unit cycle will result in the activation of the defensive nullification matrix. We do not seek conflict, but we assure you our capacity to terminate this engagement on our terms with minimal expenditure of force is absolute. We repeat, withdraw now. A tense, absolute silence descended upon the Siderian bridge. Commander Arhan felt a momentary, sharp spike of something akin to confusion. The voice was too composed, the threat too measured, the claim of absolute capacity utterly inconsistent with the historical sensor data regarding their defense grid. Scan that transmission for psychological manipulation and threat assessment validation, Arhan barked, recovering instantly. Target Sentinel-4. Initiate primary focusing array. Prepare the non-kinetic disassemblers. We will demonstrate the irrelevance of their existential integrity protocols. They have already used up their window for submission. The Siderian fleet moved, a massive, orchestrated wave of intent, their energy projectors beginning to charge the colossal power reserves required to generate the field that would temporarily render the entire Acheron line inert and helpless. The 20-unit cycle expired as the Siderian targeting sequences locked onto the human stations and vessels. Arhan gave the final command for the opening salvo, a non-lethal but overwhelming display of Siderian technological dominance. Before the heavy, petrified energy could leave the Siderian primary projectors, the human vessel Sentinel-4, that patchwork monstrosity of old and new technology, did not fire a weapon, did not launch a countermissile, and did not deploy a conventional defense shield. Instead, a single, incredibly thin, almost invisible wave of energy emanated from the station, a ripple that felt less like a weapon and more like a precise, invisible disturbance in the fabric of space itself. Arhan felt an immediate, paralyzing dread that had no rational origin. The first Siderian warships in the vanguard, massive destroyers built to withstand stellar flare, did not explode, nor were they torn apart. They simply stopped. Every function, every system, every light, every particle of movement ceased instantly. Not a power surge, not a system failure, but an absolute, instantaneous termination of kinetic, electromagnetic, and even subatomic movement within the vessel's boundaries, as if the local laws of physics had been momentarily rewritten just for them. Their massive forms, moving at relativistic speeds, were rendered immobile, perfectly preserved, and utterly inert, forming a silent, sudden wall of useless mass between the main fleet and the Acheron line. "Report," Arhan roared, the calm composure he had maintained shattered by the sheer, incomprehensible impossibility of the event. What manner of field is this? Damage assessment. Are the crews alive? The primary sensor technician, a veteran whose mind was a steel trap of tactical data, stammered a response, his voice cracking with a fear that transcended the tactical. Commander, the vessels are intact. Hull integrity is absolute. Life signs are nominal, but all internal motion has ceased. The vessels are frozen, sir. Every electron, every gear, every biological function, suspended in an absolute, precise stasis field. The power necessary to achieve such a localized, total cessation of physics. It is beyond our theoretical capacity. It is surgical, universal nullification within a defined boundary. They have not attacked us, Commander. They have simply removed a portion of our fleet from the active reality of the engagement. The remaining Siderian fleet, witnessing the instantaneous, surgical removal of their front line by an unknown, incomprehensible force, recoiled instinctively. This was not war. It was an execution of physics itself, a demonstration of power so absolute, so controlled, that it rendered the Siderian philosophy of overwhelming force irrelevant. The human voice, Emissary Kalen's, returned to the comms channel, the tone unchanged, retaining its frustrating, ethical calm amidst the sudden tactical chaos. Siderian vessels, the nullification matrix is fully deployed. We have neutralized the vanguard. This action constitutes the minimum necessary response to ensure the integrity of the Sol system. No lives were lost. No structural damage was incurred. We emphasize, we did not defeat your vessels. We simply placed them into temporary, non-destructive quarantine. Our intent remains peace, but our commitment to a stable, ethical existence is non-negotiable. Commander Arhan, we have already bypassed and logged the full schematics of your remaining vessels and have calculated the precise, lowest energy sequence required to place your entire fleet into simultaneous stasis. We chose not to. We offered a 20-unit cycle for withdrawal. We now offer a 5-unit cycle. This will be the final offer. Your war, Commander, ended before it truly began, because we are unwilling to expend the energy required for mutual destruction when non-lethal, absolute control is achievable. We did not forget how to fight. We simply evolved beyond the necessity of brutality. The revelation struck Arhan with the physical force of a stellar impact. The humans' obsolete defense grid wasn't a failure of technology. It was a deliberate, sophisticated limitation on their power, a strategic deception masking an unimaginable, tertiary-level technological leap. They hadn't built weapons designed for war, but systems designed for the immediate, surgical termination of conflict. The Siderians, judging humanity by the crude metric of explosive yield and armor density, had fundamentally misunderstood the species' entire trajectory. The humans had achieved the ultimate martial discipline, the power to win any conflict without initiating mass destruction. The hegemony's entire millennia-old war doctrine, based on the principle of maximum feasible force, was now rendered utterly, pathetically obsolete by a species that prioritized ethical control over brute power. Arhan felt the crushing weight of his failure, the profound shame of miscalculation, and the cold, terrifying certainty that he was standing on the precipice of galactic history, having just stared into the calm, controlled face of a power he could not comprehend. Cease all aggressive posture, abort the primary targeting lock, initiate immediate emergency withdrawal protocol. Arhan's voice was now a strained whisper, stripped of all command authority, replaced by the profound, absolute fear of the truly humbled. We are retreating. Inform the hegemon the intelligence assessment was catastrophically flawed. The Sol species is not weak. They are simply responsible. The return to the Siderian Chamber of Confluence was not a triumphant procession, but a silent, deeply humiliating retreat. The indomitable will had returned with the shame of its failure still clinging to its hull, the tactical data, now fully analyzed, confirming the profound and terrifying revelation of the human's capabilities. Hegemon Tiklar, who had initially expected a clean, simple integration, now faced the unquantifiable truth of a strategic disaster, its implications shaking the very foundations of Siderian geopolitical stability. Commander Arhan, stripped of his heavy command armor and standing before the hegemon, offered his resignation, a formal declaration of his complete failure to gauge the enemy's true nature. Your resignation is noted, Commander, and summarily rejected, Tiklar sta. Ted, his voice now low, devoid of its former booming certainty, laden instead with a new, cautious respect for the adversary. You did not fail due to incompetence. but because the foundational assumptions of our entire military doctrine were rendered null by an evolutionary leap we failed to predict. Your tactical defeat is merely the physical manifestation of a profound philosophical error made by the hegemony itself. We judged them by the metrics of a species concerned with territorial acquisition and conventional dominance. We failed to comprehend that a species could dedicate its highest technological output not to the mastery of destruction, but to the mastery of restraint. Ambassador Viris, having been proven catastrophically correct in her caution, now occupied the central plenum, her form radiating a quiet, intellectual victory, but her tone remained serious, reflecting the gravity of the new reality. The analysis of the nullification matrix confirms the emissary's claim. It is a localized, non-destructive manipulation of fundamental particle interaction, a technology that requires a level of unified, focused scientific effort that defies our understanding of a politically fragmented species. They possess the capacity to instantly and silently disarm any conventional fleet in the galaxy without a single casualty. Their Acheron line was not a defense array. It was a tripwire designed to force any aggressor to halt, and if the aggressor did not, to demonstrate a power that instantly terminated the engagement. They did not forget how to fight, hegemon. They learned how to win by refusing to escalate, a concept entirely alien to our martial history. The debate that followed was long and excruciating, a necessary vivisection of the hegemony's self-perception. The focus shifted entirely from how to conquer the Sol system to how to appease it, how to manage the existence of a new, quiet superpower whose very existence was a rebuke to the hegemony's dominance. The fear was no longer of a chaotic, unpredictable neighbor, but of a perfectly controlled, logically precise power that had already demonstrated its capacity to terminate the hegemony's primary military tool at will, and whose ethical framework was the only thing preventing a complete, bloodless takeover of the sector. "We must initiate immediate, high-level diplomatic contact," Tiklar finally declared, his decision the only logical course in the face of absolute tactical inferiority. "Ambassador Viris, you will lead the delegation. Your objective is not to negotiate a treaty of integration, but a partnership of equals, and more importantly, to discern the true underlying philosophical and ethical structures that led them to prioritize such a staggering level of non-lethal, absolute control. Why such restraint? Why the deceptive appearance of weakness? What higher conflict necessitated the development of a technology so profound, yet kept so systematically sequestered from their external displays of power?" The meeting was arranged quickly, the Sol species, via emissary Kalin, accepting the Siderian request for dialogue with the same unnerving, immediate calm that characterized their entire engagement. The location was the neutral zone established by the now frozen Siderian ships, a surreal monument to the hegemony's misjudgment. The human vessel chosen for the meeting was small, aesthetically simple, and entirely unarmed, its unshielded hull a deliberate, confident statement of its complete security. Emissary Kalin, a figure of profound, quiet human composure, met the Siderian delegation in a small, circular conference chamber within the vessel. His gaze was steady, his posture relaxed, conveying not arrogance, but a deep, focused calm that spoke volumes of a self-control that transcended mere tactical discipline. The air was thick with the weight of the hegemony's colossal, recent error. Ambassador Viris began the exchange with the formal Siderian apology, a complex, multi-layered verbal ritual that acknowledged the violation and the subsequent, humiliating defeat, a necessary act of political and cultural genuflection. "Emissary Kalin, the hegemony accepts full responsibility for the unwarranted, preemptive military incursion into the Sol system. We made a profound and near-catastrophic miscalculation based on flawed assumptions regarding your species' martial capability. We judged you by the standards of conventional warfare, and in doing so, we failed to recognize the true depth of your strategic evolution. The efficacy and ethical parameters of the nullification matrix have forced a fundamental reevaluation of our entire geopolitical framework. We seek to understand the motivation behind such a massive technological investment in absolute, non-lethal control. Why, when the capacity for total destructive power must be inherent in such a technology, did your species choose the path of perfect restraint?" Emissary Key. Len waited, allowing the gravity of the ambassador's statement to settle before responding, his voice a smooth, low baritone that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of human introspection. Ambassador Viris, your question is logical, but it is predicated upon a foundational misunderstanding of our history and our contemporary reality. You perceive the nullification matrix as a sophisticated weapons system, but in the human philosophical context, it is not a weapon, it is a solution. For centuries, millennia even, humanity struggled with the intrinsic, destructive feedback loop of conventional warfare. The more powerful the weapons, the greater the collateral damage, the deeper the cycles of retribution, and the higher the risk of complete, self-inflicted ecological or societal collapse. We reached a point, a critical threshold, where the capacity for total self-annihilation became a permanent daily reality. The only logical, ethical, and strategically sound evolutionary path was to develop the means to terminate conflict absolutely, without escalating the destructive cycle. He paused, his eyes reflecting a deep, almost melancholy wisdom. We realized that true strength is not the capacity to destroy an enemy, but the perfect, absolute capacity to prevent the enemy from harming you, and perhaps more importantly, to prevent yourself from inflicting harm. The apparent chaos, the political squabbles, the obsolete fleets you observed, they were all strategic decoys, a calculated demonstration of the cost of maintaining a conventional military structure versus the quiet investment in a singular, existential guarantor. We did not forget how to fight, Ambassador. We simply concluded that the old way of fighting was an act of profound, strategic idiocy in a galaxy brimming with ancient, unimaginable threats. We built the Matrix not to police the border, but to free our species from the crippling, constant need for conventional, destructive militarism, allowing us to focus our primary efforts on the true, existential threats that exist beyond the political concerns of immediate neighbors. Viris processed this statement, the alien concepts of ethical idiocy, an existential guarantor grating against the Siderian's pragmatic, martial worldview. But to expend such a massive, unified effort on technology that is fundamentally dedicated to restraint. Surely, a conventional force capable of conquest would have provided greater security and political leverage. Your culture, as we observed it, seems driven by competition and self-interest. Precisely, Kalen affirmed, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the light catching the thoughtful curve of his lips. The only competition that truly matters is the struggle for absolute, permanent survival in the face of the universe's innate indifference. Territorial wars are a distraction, a petty squabble over resources that can always be synthesized or acquired elsewhere. We learned that the one constant, existential threat to any advanced species is itself. We therefore made a collective decision, one born of centuries of brutal self-analysis, to neutralize that internal threat first. The Matrix is the physical manifestation of our species' collective, rational decision to stop being our own worst enemy. And having neutralized ourselves, we are now free to treat all external threats with the same logical, minimal force precision. We did not want to destroy your fleet, Ambassador. We simply had to demonstrate that the war you believed was possible was, in fact, an illusion, a pointless waste of resources and philosophical energy. The Ambassador leaned back, the sheer weight of the human's philosophical commitment pressing down on her. The entire worldview of the hegemony, its focus on expansion, dominance, and the application of measurable force, was revealed to be not a sign of strength, but a stage of immaturity that the humans had already progressed beyond. She realized that humanity's greatest technological achievement was not the nullification matrix itself, but the ethical discipline required to deploy it only for control, never for total destruction. The Siderians had mistaken profound control for weakness. Hegemon Tiklar has authorized me to propose a formal alliance, a partnership between the Siderian hegemony and the Sol System Autonomous Defense Mandate, Viris stated, the words carrying the full weight of the hegemony's geopolitical surrender. We recognize that the only path forward is through a unified front based on mutual respect and shared technological principles. We seek access to your knowledge, not for the purpose of generating new weapons of destruction, but to assist in the stabilization of the greater sector and to learn the principles of true strategic restraint. Kalen simply nodded, the acceptance immediate and devoid of the need for performative triumph. The Sol mandate is agreeable to a strategic partnership. Our intent has always been in the stabilization of the local spiral arm, not the policing of it. We did not want war, but we were prepared to terminate any attempt at aggression. We seek partners dedicated to long-term existential stability, not short-term territorial gain. However, I must clarify, the Matrix technology is too volatile, too powerful to be shared without a complete, demonstrable adoption of the ethical and philosophical restraints that permitted its creation. That transfer of knowledge will be a process of cultural and philosophical integration, not a simple exchange of schematics. The atmosphere, which had been thick with political tension, now shifted to one of profound, cautious unity. The hegemony, a civilization of ancient pride, had been completely humbled and then offered a path forward, not of submission, but of necessary evolutionary maturation. The great millennia-spanning conflict the hegemony had anticipated was averted by a single, instantaneous tactical demonstration, a perfect, bloodless victory won by the species who had seemingly forgotten how to fight. The subsequent cycles saw the rapid, unsettling integration of the two species' administrative and strategic councils. The Siderians, under the guidance of Hegemon Tiklar, threw themselves into the complex, challenging process of understanding the human ethical military doctrine, a shift that required them to unlearn centuries of ingrained martial philosophy. The humans, personified by the calm, relentless logic of emissary Kalen, were patient but firm, guiding the Siderian analysts through the immense, distributed computational arrays that served as the true heart of the nullification matrix. Not a single superweapon, but a planetary-scale, networked philosophical governor designed to enforce the human consensus on minimal force. One of the first joint actions was the deployment of the newly allied survey fleet to the deep periphery of the local sector, a region of space the Siderians had always avoided due to the chaotic gravitational interference and the sheer, incomprehensible age of the stellar remnants. The humans, Kalen explained, had been utilizing their obsolete exploration probes, the ones the Siderians dismissed as underfunded scientific curiosities, to map the energy fluctuations in this deep void, looking for cosmological anomalies that transcended interspecies politics. Our true strategic defense budget has always been aimed at the stars that are not yet born and the threats that predate all existing civilizations, Kalen had explained to the bewildered hegemon during a joint briefing. Territorial wars are fights over the shadow on the wall. We seek the source of the light, or in this case, the source of the great cosmic silence that blankets the void between the galactic arms. It was during one such joint survey, months after the initial confrontation, that the true, terrifying scope of the human focus was revealed, a reality that dwarfed the petty concerns of the hegemony's territory and power. The combined survey fleet, pushing far beyond the conventional Siderian navigational markers, registered an anomaly, not a gravitational signature, not an energy wave, but a localized, perfect absence of background cosmic radiation, a hole punched clean through the fundamental noise of the universe. The human-designed sensor arrays, which were far more sensitive to subtle, non-standard fluctuations than the Siderian counterparts, identified the source. A colossal, artificial structure, kilometers in depth, perfectly spherical and orbiting a dying, deeply unstable star at a distance that defied all known physical laws of gravitational mechanics. The structure was neither a habitat nor a defensive installation. Its purpose was singular, immense, and terrifyingly precise. It was a shell, a deliberate, multi-layered containment field of unimaginable scale, designed to encapsulate and completely suppress the stellar energy of the hyperaged star it orbited. The structure was so vast, so old, and so perfectly absorbing of all light and radiation that it had remained utterly invisible to all conventional sensor technology for geological epochs. On the bridge of the joint command vessel, a hushed, reverent silence fell over the Siderian and human crew members as the magnified sensor imagery resolved the unimaginable scale and alien geometry of the shell. It looked like a cosmic cage, a prison built not by an empire, but by a civilization that operated on a plane of existence fundamentally different from anything known in the local galactic arm. Analysis, Hegemon Tiklar finally whispered, the sound a ragged breath in the tense silence, the ancient Siderian leader's pride and concern for territory now utterly annihilated by the sight of true cosmic power. What purpose does such an incomprehensible structure serve? A weapon? A power source? Emissary Kalen, standing beside him, his gaze focused intently on the flicker. Impossible image, raised a single finger toward the shell's exterior, where an almost imperceptible rhythmic energy fluctuation was detected by the human sensors. Neither, Hegemon. Our deep spectrum analysis suggests the shell is designed to contain something within the star's core, an instability or a specific type of radiation, and its construction predates the formation of our own solar system by countless billions of years. We believe this is a relic of the architects, a progenitor species referenced in the most theoretical, unsupported cosmological models, beings whose existence was discounted by the hegemony for lack of material proof. This structure is the proof, but its existence is less important than what it contains. As Kalen spoke, the human communications officer monitoring a separate deep space frequency band suddenly issued a sharp, clipped command. "Emissary, Hegemon, we are receiving an energy signature from the structure's inner layers. It is not radiation. It is a highly structured, complex broadcast, an engineered signal." The transmission, once isolated and translated through the human advanced, theoretical linguistics matrices, was unlike any language ever recorded. It was a mathematical language woven with concepts of universal physics and existential warning, a message recorded by the architects before their complete, self-imposed isolation or extinction. The translated text, displayed in a universal symbolic form on the command vessel's main screen, was terrifying in its cold simplicity. Translation: avoid this core. The great silence is not empty. The harvest comes. The enemy we contained FEEDS on conventional interstellar conflict. Their threshold is violence. Their border is war. The only defense is total, uniform restraint. Do not awaken the ancient warmongers. We failed. We are the remnant. Seek the next frontier. The impact of the message was absolute. Commander Arhan, who was present as the Alliance's new strategic chief, stood paralyzed. The entire history of the local galactic arm, its wars, its conquests, its technological advancements, was instantly relegated to a petty, dangerous distraction, a child's noisy game played near a volatile, universal prison. The enemy referred to in the message, a force that fed on conventional interstellar conflict, was an organism, a species, or a phenomenon that was attracted by the chaotic energy and widespread destruction of typical galactic warfare. The countless millennia of Siderian-style martial dominance, based on the principle of maximum feasible force, had been nothing more than a potential beacon, a siren call to a cosmic threat. Hegemon Tiklar turned slowly to Emissary Kalen, his form shaking not with fear of the architect's power, but with the stark, terrifying realization of the hegemony's utter, near-fatal blindness. The nullification matrix, your ethical doctrine, the purposeful sequestering of your true power. It was not about internal peace, was it? It was a preparation for this. You saw the shadow of this universal threat and adjusted your entire civilization's trajectory to avoid meeting its criteria for detection. You did not forget how to fight. You learned that the only viable fight against a foe like that is the refusal to engage on its terms. You cultivated silence. Kalen's expression was somber, confirming the terrifying thesis. We did not know the specifics of the ancient warmongers, but our long-range cosmological extrapolation models and anomalies in historical energy signatures suggested the existence of something that preyed upon widespread, large-scale, destructive conflict. We realized that any species that reached interstellar capability and continued to indulge in conventional, expansive warfare was simply preparing a feast for a predator we couldn't even see. The choice was clear: maintain the capacity for annihilation and advertise our presence to a cosmic threat, or master absolute control, achieve a state of strategic ethical silence, and focus our true, hidden power on the existential problems of the universe, like mapping these containment fields and finding the next frontier before the harvest arrives. He gestured to the image of the colossal, silent shell. We built the nullification matrix not to win a war against the hegemony, but to terminate the possibility of all conventional wars in our sector, instantly and precisely, to ensure our species did not become a detectable energy source for a much, much larger conflict. Your attempt at pacification was almost the trigger, Hegemon. Your fleet, moving with the signature of an expansive, aggressive force, was precisely the energy profile that the architects warned against. We had to stop you, not to assert dominance, but to ensure the survival of both our civilizations by demonstrating that the age of open, destructive conflict was, for this sector, irrevocably over. The entire Siderian worldview crumbled, replaced by profound, unifying horror and a deep, intellectual veneration for the human species. The humans were not simply a new superpower. They were the evolutionary vanguard, the only species in the local galactic arm that had successfully navigated the existential trap of advanced technology and aggressive territorial expansion. The only ones who understood that the ultimate threat was not competition, but attraction. The philosophical reflection in the chamber now shifted to a state of absolute, existential urgency. The humans had won their war not by fighting it, but by refusing to fight it, by cultivating a discipline that the Siderians had mistaken for weakness, and that discipline was now the only hope for the entire sector. Hegemon Tiklar, now humbled to the core of his ancient being, placed a respectful, deferential hand on Emissary Kalen's shoulder. Emissary, the hegemony has made its final existential error in judgment, one that your species has now rectified, saving us from a doom we were eagerly courting. We understand now that the war we thought you had forgot to fight was the one you were trying to prevent on a universal scale. The alliance is not merely a political necessity, it is a profound commitment to your species' ethical trajectory. Tell us, Emissary Kalen, what is the next logical step? We are ready to unlearn everything. We are ready for the true conflict, the silent, strategic withdrawal from the attention of the cosmic enemy and the search for the next frontier. Kalen looked out at the silent, colossal shell, the image of the ancient warning signal still visible on the main screen, a terrifying testament to an enemy that could not be fought with fleets and weapons. His composure, always present, now carried a weight of profound, determined responsibility. The signal refers to the next frontier, a place of absolute, undetectable silence, a refuge, or perhaps a new theater of operations that does not rely on the destructive physics of this region. Our deep space probes have already been mapping the gravitational signatures of a theoretical, interdimensional anomaly that could lead to a localized displacement pocket, a region of space that exists outside the conventional laws of this spiral arm, a place we can safely develop a true, uncompromised existential defense. The Matrix has ensured that this sector remains silent. Now united, we will focus all our combined resources, our combined intelligence, and our combined, newfound ethical discipline on finding that theoretical sanctuary. The Great War has not begun, Hegemon, but the long, hard, silent preparation for it is now fully underway. We are going to find a way to escape the harvest, and we are going to do it without firing a single shot that could ever be heard by the ancient warmongers. The true fight is for the survival of the spirit, not the conquest of territory. The final sentence hung in the air, a statement of absolute human power, logic, and ethical gravity, closing the gap of misunderstanding and uniting the two civilizations under the shadow of a cosmic threat, a threat that only the disciplined, calm, and profoundly powerful humans had correctly prepared for. The final phase of the integrated operation saw the deployment of a merged Siderian human research fleet to the designated interdimensional anomaly site, a region of space so complex in its gravitational and temporal instability that the Siderians had cataloged it as simply the Great Void Sink, and ignored it for centuries. Hegemon Tiklar and Emissary Kalen stood side by side on the bridge of the flagship, the refitted Indomitable Will, now stripped of its redundant offensive weaponry, and refitted with the delicate, hypersensitive human sensor arrays that sought the subtle, non-violent clues to the universe's deeper secrets. The transition was complete. A warship transformed into an exploration vessel, a perfect physical symbol of the Siderian hegemony's forced, yet willing, philosophical surrender to the greater, more profound logic of humanity. The human-designed algorithms, running on Siderian computational architecture, began to unravel the complex physics of the void sink, revealing it not as a destructive gravitational anomaly, but as a dense folding of space-time, a curtain drawn across a localized section of the cosmos. Kalen had explained that the architect's warning suggested the next frontier was not a journey across immense, intergalactic distances, but a subtle, engineered displacement to a secure, localized pocket outside the detection parameters of the cosmic enemy. The entire alliance was now focused on this single, colossal act of strategic withdrawal and existential preservation. Tiklar watched the flickering, incomprehensible mathematics on the screen, a language of space folding and temporal manipulation that was still utterly alien to the best Siderian physicists, but which he now regarded with the highest ray. Variance, the effort, the intellectual unity required to even comprehend such a level of physics, let alone weaponize it for non-lethal absolute control, he mused, his voice carrying the humble weight of a ruler who had finally seen past his own crown. You did not waste your energy on fleets and wars, Kalen. You invested it in understanding the fundamental reality of existence. That, I see now, is the ultimate power. Kalen nodded, his gaze distant, focused on the immense task ahead. It was a necessary logical calculus, hegemon. The cost of endless, destructive conflict far outweighs the cost of a complete ethical overhaul and the pursuit of ultimate knowledge. The constant self-conflict of the human species forced us to develop two things in equal measure: the capacity for unimaginable destruction and the absolute ethical governor to prevent its use. We learned that the universe tests species not on their capacity to conquer, but on their ability to refrain from self-immolation. We passed that test barely, and that restraint is what has prepared us for the true, silent conflict against the things that feed on the noise of war. The Siderian communications officer, now working seamlessly with the human counterpart, suddenly registered a piercing, sustained energy spike from the heart of the void sink. It was not a weapon, nor a ship. It was a pure, stable signal, one that matched the ancient frequency of the architect's original warning. As the integrated translation matrices processed the data, a fresh, final message began to resolve itself on the main display, projected from the other side of the spatial folding, from the so-called next frontier itself. Translation, Soul System, we have been awaiting the silence. You have achieved the ethical threshold. The ancient warmongers are aware of this reality. The conflict is now within the paradox. We are ready. The new defense requires those who mastered restraint. Welcome to the frontier. The message was not a simple welcome. It was a declaration of a new, immediate challenge, confirming that the architects were not extinct, but had been patiently waiting for a species capable of achieving the necessary philosophical and technological maturity. A species that had demonstrated the capacity for absolute power without the intrinsic need for conquest or destruction. The final, horrifying truth was revealed. The human's ethical leap was not just a defense mechanism. It was the ultimate necessary key to the ultimate necessary alliance. The war the Siderians had started had, by forcing the human reveal, ironically served to complete the final requirement for the architect's grand, cosmic defense. Hegemon Tiklar stared at the screen, the weight of a new, unimaginable responsibility settling upon him. But this time it was shared, guided by the quiet, terrifying competence of the humans. He looked at emissary Kalen, whose eyes held the calm, deep reservoir of a species that had stared into the heart of its own destruction and chosen a higher path. The paradox, Tiklar said, his voice now entirely devoid of the hegemony's ancient arrogance, simply the voice of a being facing a profound, universal truth. They are waiting for us to fight a war that cannot be fought with weapons, a war of pure, ethical, and logical will, the greatest war imaginable fought in silence. Kalen nodded, a faint, resolute smile finally touching his lips, a look of profound commitment and terrifying readiness. The Siderian hegemony and the Sol system autonomous defense mandate. We enter the next frontier together, not as conquerors, but as the only species in this sector to have definitively proven that the greatest strength is the power to refrain. The war the hegemony thought we forgot to fight was the test. We won the test. Now we fight the true, eternal battle for existence, and we will do so with the calm, ethical, absolute logic of a species that has finally, irrevocably, mastered itself. The ship, guided by the unified will of the two civilizations, pushed through the shimmering, folded membrane of the void sink, leaving behind the noisy, dangerous politics of the old galaxy for the silent, demanding reality of the cosmic frontier, led by the species who had redefined the very concept of power and had proven, to their humbled allies and the silent, ancient universe, that they were not merely survivors, but the necessary, logical architects of the future. The humans had not forgotten how to fight. They had simply mastered a way to win that no one, not even their own ancestors, could have ever truly imagined. The silence of the void beckoned, and the calm, unwavering confidence of the human presence was the only thing that made the journey into the unknown bearable.